This is Battleground PA, a PennLive podcast discussing the issues that matter to Pennsylvanians and documenting the events in the Keystone State and beyond that could shape how you vote in the 2024 elections.
Well, hello again, everyone, dear readers and viewers and listeners. This is Joyce Davis, PennLive's outreach and opinion editor, and this is Battleground PA. And I have with me, as usual, back to normal, our two very highly respected, esteemed, and beloved pundits. We have Jeffrey Lord, who loves Ronald Reagan, and hello, Jeffrey. And we have Rogette Harris, who wants to tell you why President Biden is the best president that ever lived. Maybe not ever lived, but he's the best one for now. Look, let's get started. I wanted to begin our conversation by simply stepping back and talking about what we think the top issues are right now. And I wanted to bring that up because I sat in on a forum with congressional candidates for District 10, but only, of course, the Democrats showed up. Representative Perry was invited to show up. He declined to show up, did not show up. But basically, they asked the candidates to listen to the voters, to listen to what they thought their issues were. And as I was listening, here's what I took away. I took away, at least right now, the top issues in Pennsylvania seemed to be, and everybody was agreed, that everybody's scared that we're losing our democracy. That is like huge, at least on Democrats' mind. We're in a crisis period where we could lose this wonderful democracy we have. Then they brought up things like the cost of living, the prices. Then they brought up issues like definitely abortion is an issue. And so as I was listening to that, I thought, let me ask you guys, as from your different perspectives, what do you think are the issues right now that are galvanizing voters? Rogette, why don't you start? Do you agree with that list? I don't know if you went to that forum, but do you agree with that list that they came up with?
I was not at that forum, but I do think a lot of the issues you mentioned are definitely at the top of Democrat voters' minds. It also depends on where you live, obviously, and what your personal status is. Different parts of the state has different issues. I think the cost of living, though, is something that's universal. The Democrat Party has been pushing for years, decades, to raise the minimum wage. The Republican Party has kept us from being able to do that. But even raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, it's not the same thing as a living wage, which is around $24 an hour. Yes, $24 an hour. And as we know, a living wage is different from a minimum wage, especially with the way food prices, rent, mortgages, and whatnot has gone up. So obviously, cost of living is important. President Biden, in his first re-election speech, said, democracy is on the ballot. That was in his very first speech in Montgomery County when he kicked off his campaign with Vice President Harris. So that is a huge concern for Democrats everywhere. So the issues that you mentioned are definitely some of the issues at the top of the Democrat Party's radar.
And I'm surprised that, again, as someone who spent a lot of my life, looking at the world instead of local, now it looks like even local people are looking at the world. Gaza is an issue, and Ukraine is an issue it seems, for many Pennsylvanians. But Jeffrey, why don't you weigh in here? Is that how Republicans see it? Are these the issues that are going to push those Republicans to the polls?
Well, I think always, unless, we're dealing with World War III, I think it's always the economy first. And there's a reason for that. People get up every day. They got to buy groceries. They got to get gas, et cetera. So it hits home for them. And, really, no matter what year we're talking about, if there's an election, that's an issue. Then the secondary issue, I think, is immigration. And I think it is pushed by media, by social media and all of this. I don't know if you guys have seen the New York Post video of illegal, people on the other side cutting through the wire fence and then overwhelming and attacking the National Guard or the Border Patrol, whatever that was there on the border. I mean, pretty frightening thing, using physical violence to get into this country. So
Almost as almost as scary as January 6th, right?
I was thinking the same thing.
Sorry,
I was just
sorry,
thinking.
Jeffrey.
oh, you had to do it. You had to do
Sorry. You go ahead. Just poke you a little.
But I really do think that that plays a role. And to you were touching on this in a way. I think that one of the really big things we have to comprehend here is the role of the media. It went from I mean, none of us were around when television began to show up, and I think I'm right that in 1920 it was radio that aired the first convention. It was the Republican convention that nominated Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge, and that was the first time regular folks were able to tune in and hear something. And this progressed over time, and FDR made wonderful use of it with the fireside chats and all that. Then television begins to come along and televises the first, in I think it was 1952, or possibly 48, but at a minimum when Eisenhower was nominated and Truman and all that. And then, I'll always, as a big JFK fan, he was asked, he was a young senator from Massachusetts in 1956, and he was asked to nominate Adlai Stevenson, who was the front runner for the Democratic presidential nomination at the Democratic convention. Well, he did so, and that really brought him to the attention of the Democratic delegates. Stevenson relinquished the sort of normal thing where the presidential nominee picks his running mate and threw it open to the convention. And out of the blue, there was a move to nominate JFK. Well, he lost to Estes Kefauver, the senator from Tennessee, very much in the news in the day for investigating the rackets and all that sort of thing. But it so propelled JFK. We know the rest of the story, that 4 years later.
No, we know media exposure.
Can I bring up something a little bit more recent?
Yeah, go ahead, Rogette.
Just bring up a little bit more recent history is, let's look at just last year in 2023. In Pennsylvania statewide, the Democrat Party swept all of our judicial races, Supreme Court, Superior Court, and Commonwealth Court. And the biggest issue that propelled all of our candidates, all four of our candidates to win last year, was reproductive rights for women. That was one of the biggest issues that we as a party campaigned on, because abortion rights is still legal here in Pennsylvania. And we swept all of those statewide races in a year where the turnout is going to be, was lower than what we're going to see this year. So at least in the state of Pennsylvania, I do think that that's going to be a huge issue. And as we all know, women vote more than men.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you, Jeffrey, I know you keep bringing up immigration, and I get that's a big deal, but from what I'm getting and the letters I'm getting to the editors and the op-eds, it's not that big of an issue in Pennsylvania from what I'm seeing. Not that people don't care about securing the borders, but it doesn't have that same urgency that it might have in
You could be right about that.
I don't know.
You could be right about it. Again, as they say, I think it's always the economy.
Yeah.
Until there is something that is so just widely and overwhelmingly taking over the stage. And I don't see that issue. I mean, do I think abortion is an issue for some people? Yes. Immigration for other people? Yes. But I think it's the economy.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things, one of the Evie DeJesus was sitting in one of our reporters was sitting in one of the discussion groups where they were talking to the candidates and telling them what they thought. She noticed a distinct generational divide, even on the economy. And I hear it also, one of the candidates, Blake Lynch, consistently talks about how hard it is for him as the father with two kids, and apparently college debts that exceed six figures, how hard it is for them to basically take care of their families, from the cost of food to so they want someone, a congressperson, who's going to speak to those kinds of issues, including college debt, it seems.
Well, Joyce,
Nobody cares about that if you're over 50, but
well, no, but I think that I think that one of the sort of sleeper issues that has not been brought forward here to any significant degree is college debt. And the thing that always baffles me is, as somebody who's a college graduate from Franklin Marshall, and I believe I'm correct, that in the day, a good old mom and dad, and of course I was working day jobs in the summer and all that sort of thing, we had to pay $4,000 a year
Yep.
for my F&M degree.
That's a
Well,
couple books now.
yeah, that's exactly my point. And I think that that this is could be a sleeper issue, because
Yes.
the answer is, I mean, this is not caused by government policy. This is caused by colleges and universities who are paying, extraordinary salaries and doing all sorts of extraordinary things on their campuses and jacking up the cost of tuition. And I do think that if somebody out there made that an issue, that might catch on a bit.
well, this gets to the system things, because it's the system of higher ed that's got. I mean, we had the Lithuanian foreign minister in for breakfast, and one of the questions I asked him was, "How much does it cost to go to college in Lithuania?" And he said, "Oh, I'm embarrassed to have to tell you, it's free." He says maybe, if you're living somewhere, it's a few thousand, for the total thing, for all the. He says, but no, that's something we make possible for our kids. So, Rogette, you want to go to Lithuania? I mean, really.
And that's why I said earlier, it really depends on who you are, what stage of life you are, and where you are. As someone who still has college debt, it is a huge issue. And as you know, it's keeping people from starting families.
Yes.
You have people in their 30s still living at home, not because they want to or they're lazy. They literally cannot afford to move out. Let's not even get into the purchasing a first home. And then we get into wages. When we bring up not just the minimum wage, but wages in general are not moving at the same rate as inflation, even though wages have increased, particularly for union jobs. But then we get into, again, the living wage versus, the cost of living. It's a huge issue for sure. President Biden has forgiven a lot of student debt for students across the country. I believe it's more for undergraduate degrees. I don't want to get into the specifics, but we know that he did personally forgive a lot of debt, even though the Supreme Court struck down his program. Program I would have been included in, by the way.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, he can't do it by himself. He's got to have support with Congress, and that's why it's not only the presidential election, but the congressional elections that are important.
So, Joyce, of course, I've got to ask, if they're paying off all the student debt, why can't they go back and pay me back for mine?
Well, you know what? My heart is generous enough that I would say, let's help the young people, and I'll take my lumps, right? But I have a generous heart. So,
but you can't compare.
My favorite Robert Kennedy Sr. quote is, "Youth is not a time of life; it's a state of mind." So I'm a kid.
You go. There you go.
But Jeff, if I only had $4,000 a year, I don't think people would be in the situation they are today. Yeah. You even laughed at my joke that that's literally books now. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I think it's a crime. I honestly think it's a crime what we have done to this generation of Americans.
And
we made them think that a college degree is mandatory. They have to have it to succeed, but then would they mortgage their lives to get it?
Right. And one of the things
encourage them to do so.
One of the things I think I found very interesting about Governor Shapiro is putting out a rule or whatever that says you don't have to be a college graduate to be a state employee. I thought interesting.
Yeah. Well, things are changing, but honestly, you got to it, Jeffrey. I'm gonna have to give the kudos to you at this conversation, because the colleges have to begin taking the lead on this.
Yes.
Instead of increasing tuition, they have to start reducing, and some are looking at it, and they have to redo that system so that you've got to figure out what you don't pay for these grand buildings. You have to get back to the basics of educating people rather than giving them a luxurious lifestyle for 4 years. But anyway, that's
schools. If you want to go to your Ivy Leagues or private institutions, that's one thing. but our state public institutions should not be as much as they are. And I'm a Pitt graduate, so I'm speaking from experience with that.
Well, frankly, I think we're all on the same page. It's a crime. Something should be done about it. And you're right, guys. It may be a sleeper issue because we're hearing it a lot from the younger people. And as I say, one of those candidates, Blake Lynch, he's probably the youngest of all, and he's bringing it up every time you hear him. But let's move on.
Well, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
We're even still in the COVID debate. As you know, that was also, I would argue, a generational divide when COVID first hit. But even now, some people think that COVID's over, and I'm not speaking health-wise, I'm speaking financially. Some people weren't hit as hard as others, or some people were able to bounce back. But I have discussions even with Democrats who say, oh, well, no one can use COVID anymore. That was 4 years ago. That's over. No, there are some people, businesses. I mean, pretty much everything from my childhood has been closed down.
Yeah.
A lot of things have not been able to survive COVID. So we are still dealing with the financial repercussions of that.
We know so many restaurants have gone out of business. So you're absolutely right.
I hate to say this, but I think this is with us for a long time to come, maybe permanently.
Yep. Hear you. And let Lord help us if there's another one. But we're not going to go there. We're going to go to some other news now. And that news is the most recent poll shows Biden forging out ahead. But Jeffrey, you and I are skeptical of the polls. And I did go to a press club luncheon on Monday where the pollster James Lee, I believe, was there. And he is with Susquehanna Polling and Research.
Right.
And somebody challenged him, says, are polls irrelevant anymore? I mean, do they matter anymore? Now, I left that realizing something I hadn't realized before, which I'll wait to tell you, but I want to talk to you two and say, are these polls relevant anymore? What's the good of polling when you can't trust them, right, Rogette?
The latest poll, I guarantee you, the latest poll will last about 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah, and yay if it's for me, but boo if it's not, right?
I mean, just think, I mean, this tragedy that happened overnight here, it's not in Pennsylvania, it's in Baltimore.
Yes.
But just imagine if you
you
are running for state office in Maryland and you go to bed and, you're campaigning on the economy or whatever, and then something like this happens and suddenly you and all of your peers in the political world have to deal with it. And I noticed in dipping in on the coverage, there was the governor, there was the 2 U.S. senators, there were others, there was the mayor of Baltimore. I mean, all of a sudden something happens and people are, the topic changes entirely. So, I mean,
as we both know, it could end up impacting depending upon how the federal government responds or what it.
That's right.
It really could. And that's what we've been talking about all along, that anything can happen. A disaster or whatever that can impact these elections. Rogette, I'm sorry, you wanted to talk about the polling and whether you think it's worth it or not?
I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic, but it's not written in sand. I think it's like a snapshot of that time period, but it might not last.
Right.
Obviously, throughout the summer.
For nothing do we call this show Battleground PA.
I
mean, we are the dead center, I think, of the battleground, and we are going to be seeing a lot of these two candidates and all of that stuff. I'm seeing, and frankly, I'm ignorant as to who they are, but I am seeing signs sprouting up in my neck of the woods for state legislative candidates, and one is identified on the sign as a Democrat. There are others, but in all candor, I hate to admit this, but frankly, when I was young, I ran for the legislature here, and this was the 87th district. I think we haven't moved, and I think I'm out of the 87th district and maybe in the 103rd, or I don't know.
Hard to keep up with all of this.
I need to do my research before I show up and vote.
Right. No, but I guess one of the things I took away from what he said was that the polls are actually quite helpful to candidates because at that point in time, it can tell them where they need to spiffy
Right.
up things and where they need to pay attention. And one of the things that he said when he was looking at the presidential race is that he does feel President Trump needs to do a whole lot more reaching out to those independent voters. He thinks in Pennsylvania in particular, that's going to be crucial. That he's not going to be able to win it with just his base, that you're going to have to pull in independent. And do you guys, Rogette, what are your views on that? Are those independent voters powerful this time?
Very much so. And I think even the primary showed that, even though we knew that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee, there are states where Nikki Haley did very, very well. And a lot of her voters were more of your moderate slash independent voters who aren't necessarily going to just go to Donald Trump. So I definitely think he needs to reach out beyond his base. I personally think that's going to be extremely difficult for him to do. I'm sure Jeff will just disagree.
Yeah, no, honestly, I think what she said
President Biden needs to move beyond just,
exactly.
The Democrat base, like myself, as just your normal super voters. And even in Pennsylvania, voter registrations are becoming more and more independent. I personally am for open primaries, and I think if we had open primaries, we would have even more independence. It's just that because we're a closed primary state, people are, choosing more of a side.
To be
And I
honest,
see
I
you
would be an
recruiting a
independent.
voter. I see, Rogette, that you are recruiting a voter who's right behind you trying to the camera.
Meow, meow. Right. Can't be controlled, those independent voters. But Jeffrey, I mean, it is true. We're going to have to have, I mean, how can President Trump appeal to middle moderate, people who really don't like extremes when much of what he's about is this revolutionary stuff, to put it nicely.
Well, I think the economy and all of that. I don't have any doubt that he and Joe Biden are both going to do that.
Yeah.
We live in a state that is not. I mean, I think we're all old enough to recall that there were states in the 50 where if you were living in Vermont, it was an automatic that you were a Republican and it was a Republican state. Over time that changed. Witness Bernie Sanders. But we have states like that, and we have states that were automatically leaning Democrat. Ours has always sort of gone back and forth. We've had more than our share of Republicans. I myself, as you know, worked for a Republican senator, U.S. senator, and Republican congressman. We're going to have people that I mean, we collectively met with Senator Casey the other week. So it's just it is an independent-minded state, and
for good reason. I love Pennsylvania for that reason. Independent minded, and we ought to be
you
able
really
to
have to get out and persuade your audience, and and it doesn't matter whether you're running for what office: senator, state legislator, governor, and certainly president. So I imagine that the two presidential nominees will be here a lot.
Yeah, but
I can't speak for the Republicans, but on the Democrat side, you're going to see a lot of candidates campaigning together as a slate. For instance, you're going to see President Biden promoting Senator Casey because as Democrats, we not only want to take over the House, but we need to keep the Senate, and preferably by a larger margin. So you're going to see a lot of working together within the Democrat Party. I'm curious to see if you see that as much with the Republican Party because of the split.
I think they'll rally. I think they'll rally. They'll sort of sense how important it is. And again, and I think I've mentioned this in the past, but I'll mention it again. You never quite know as you go into these things how things are going to turn out. And as I vividly remember, in 1980, the various Republican parties around the country couldn't get their sort of A-list people to run for the U.S. Senate because they thought they would lose. Well, lo and behold, so they picked their B or C list candidates. Lo and behold, what people didn't see coming was the Reagan landslide And the morning after Election Day, all these people, once anonymous, were United States senators elect. And for the first time since 1954, Republicans were in control of the Senate. I
Mm.
don't know yet that this is going to be like that. But I mean, I just think you need to realize that something like that can happen. For that matter, it can happen on either side of the equation here. So,
Yeah. Well,
um,
which brings me to this other topic I wanted to throw out at you guys. The third party candidates that are out there,
I
all of this stuff about the no labels and Robert Kennedy and all of that. I mean, from what I'm hearing, people, at least this poster when he said that there's definitely a desire among many independents and moderates and all for somebody different from the two. There's definitely a yearning for something else. But can these third party candidates, any of them, really pull people away from the Democrats or the Republican candidates? Rogette?
Yes,
yes,
Whoa.
we've seen that in the past.
Hmm.
yes.
It's happened in the past. It's definitely a concern. You know, President Biden needs all the votes he can get. You know, we can't afford to lose any votes. Even in 2020, it was close, as we all know. So third parties have in the past hurt, and it's a possibility if they make it on the ballot to happen again, which is another reason why we have to do all we can to reach voters to make sure they vote for
I get what
President
you're saying,
Biden.
but I will tell you, they also said that it could hurt President Trump, the third part, because these are people looking for something other than what's there, and so it could hurt his.
I think this has yet to gel. And
Yeah,
I'm sorry to say, I can't, I have not yet learned her name, but Robert Kennedy today picked his vice presidential running mate. And as I understand it, she is the child of a Chinese immigrant, who was not only very successful, but she married the co-founder of Google.
yeah,
And
Nicole Shanahan. She's apparently a wealthy person who's like,
so,
yeah,
I mean, the one thing I know for sure is that beyond her circle of friends, she's unknown.
right.
And so she could well turn out to be a big plus for Bob Kennedy, or just neutral, or if she wanders off in some particular direction that people don't like, she could be a negative. You never know.
You have
But
to think she's pretty much out there if she's going to be with him because he's pretty much out there, right?
Yes, but even the Kennedy family is not supporting him openly,
right.
supporting President Biden.
That's what I
Yes,
don't
they
think is
are.
going to appeal to moderates or independents. I mean, unless it's an independent that's like a libertarian or something. That, but
Well, the thing is, Joyce and Rogette, in our system of presidential politics, I mean, let's take the 2016 election and Jill Stein, who didn't stand a prayer
mhm,
of
mhm.
being elected president, but she did, particularly right here in Pennsylvania, attract enough votes that it helped Donald Trump. And we've seen this time after time. To go back to my youth in 1968, George Wallace got a significant chunk of the vote, which enabled Richard Nixon to win with, I think it was 43% of the vote.
Mhm.
So they can do
Oh
a
yeah, we've seen
three
in past
candidate
years. Yeah, we've seen
and do
third
real
party.
damage to
Yeah, yeah.
a presidential campaign. And I think we're just too early to figure out which one that's going to be yet.
Well, we're going to keep our eyes on that. But I went to one final thing, Jeffrey, that you brought up. Let's talk about it. I know the Republicans are trying to, in Pennsylvania in particular, trying to stop the mail-in voting, and now they're going after, right, not making sure that you get voter ID, that people show up and they got to identify themselves to vote. Tell me about that. Is that a concern for you, or you're behind?
Yeah, I mean, I have never understood the opposition to this. I mean, when I go to the Giant and buy a bottle of wine and there's somebody in front of me, it doesn't make any difference how old they are. They have to produce their driver's license to buy a bottle of wine, a bottle of booze, whatever. If you're going to get on a plane, you got to produce your ID. It just seems to me the most simplest of things. If there's a problem getting a voter ID, then we should have a system that enables them to be given out so
Yeah.
that people can get them, whether that means using the Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever. But I just think it would be very helpful because, again, and we've touched on this before, the sad fact is in our beloved Commonwealth, we have had problems with voter integrity and overturned elections there in that state Senate race and otherwise. And I just think let's be sure.
Let's narrow it down. Let's clamp down. Well, Rogette, I mean, he does make a good point. We got to bring driver's license for many different things. You got to bring ID. Why not when you go to vote?
The Republicans have been trying to do this for decades. I remember working in the House when this bill first came up. And I wrote some of the amendments against it, actually. So it's nothing new. It's a tactic, in my opinion, to suppress the vote. As we all know, in Pennsylvania, you have to show voter picture ID if you're a first-time voter. If you move, you're voting at a new polling location. So there are instances in Pennsylvania where you do have to show voter ID. So, let's talk about the whole picture out there. As far as evidence of voter fraud, there has been virtually none that has been proven in this state. So
I would disagree with that.
And that's well, it's been investigated, it's been audited, it's been shown. Have there ever been
people in jail right this minute for voter fraud?
I'm sorry, what?
There are people in jail
right this minute for voter fraud.
There has been nothing substantiated. This even went through the courts, MPA and whatnot. So, I mean, if you want to say all of our judges are ignoring evidence, then, so be it. But this is a tactic that Republicans have been used forever to suppress the vote. And again, we do have instances in PA where people have to show voter ID. So
at least for the first time.
I would suggest that denying voter ID is voter suppression.
Oh, well, we definitely have a disagreement there. We're going to take this up later, but I can tell you on this issue, I kind of fall. I know it's going to be blasphemy, but I kind of fall on Jeffrey's side.
Uh-oh.
Just show them their ID and move on and vote. But I get it. You want to make it as easy as possible for people to vote. So I get that as well. And I'm also in favor of sending limousines to people's houses and picking them up and bringing them. All right, but we won't go into that. All right. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for once again joining me for a scintillating Battleground PA conversation. We will see you next week where I'm sure there'll be something else for us to talk about.
I have not the slightest doubt of it.
All right. Enjoy now, guys. Bye-bye.
All right. I'll see you. Bye-bye.